Are you ready for more fantastic words that I've picked out? Starting with candid. To be candid means to be truthful and straightforward, honest, frank, to the point. His responses were remarkably candid, remarkably truthful, straightforward, getting to the point, candid and honest. He gave a candid assessment of the situation, an honest assessment, not hiding away from the blemishes. Candor, linked, but this time it's a noun rather than an adjective. The quality of being open and honest, frankness. It's a bit like the noun version of candid. He displayed great candor when he talked about the situation. She was a person that always demonstrated candor. The candor with which he acknowledged a weakness in his own case was refreshing. They were surprised and refreshed at how honest he was. His candor. Capacious, having a lot of capacity, having a lot of space inside, roomy, and that can be used both literally and metaphorically. That car has a capacious trunk that makes it a good choice for families. It's got lots of room, lots of space, lots of capacity. It's capacious. But more metaphorically, the greatest accomplishment of this absorbing novel is its capacious understanding, its huge understanding, full of depth, of the competing values these folks hold. So in that sense, we're not talking literally about volume of storage, it's more about the size and depth of the understanding that the author had. Capacious. Capitulate. To cease to resist, to surrender, to yield. The enemy was forced to capitulate unconditionally, without setting any conditions. They were forced to surrender, capitulate. Doesn't have to be war though. The company capitulated to the labour union to avoid a strike. They gave in, ceased to resist. They yielded. Caprice. You're going to get two words, one after another, based on this origin. A caprice is a sudden and unaccountable change of mood or behaviour. Or summed up, it's a whim. He enacted policy changes that seemed to be motivated by nothing more than caprice, unaccountable changes in mood, just his fancy in the moment of what to do. Doesn't have to be a person. You could describe it as the capricious weather, and that's the next word we'll get onto. Notice the same origin. Caprice, capricious. Unpredictable, sudden, based on whim and fancy. And of course, the next word is capricious. Again, given to sudden and unaccountable changes of mood or behaviour, fickle. I don't believe in random occurrences or blind chance, though I know the patterns of this world are capricious and complex. So the person doesn't believe in random things, but they accept that this world is unpredictable, fickle, given to sudden changes. It's capricious and also complex. Caprice, you might say, is slightly more often used when we're talking about a person's caprice, whereas capricious could be either a person who's unpredictable or events or the world which is capricious. So it's a bit more even with capricious. Could be a person, could be an object, whereas caprice, I would say, is 90% of the time you're talking about someone's whim, someone's fancy, an individual with that word. Either way, they both have the same origin. To captivate, to attract and hold the interest and attention of. To charm, to fascinate, to entrance. Notice that second word is an entrance. It's entrance, to put someone into a trance, to charm them, to captivate them, almost like you're making them your captive. He was captivated by her beauty. The scenery captivated our attention, caught it, captured it, made it a captive. Didn't just attract you, it held your attention and charmed you, captivated you. The carcass. Now you might have wondered why I included this word if it means the dead body of an animal. Well, first of all, that's good to know. And second of all, it can also be used more broadly as the remains of something. And an example of how it doesn't always have to be the dead body of an animal, you can say vehicle carcasses stripped of radios, hubcaps, and even body panels. So it's the carcass of a vehicle, a car or a lorry, a truck. So that clearly isn't a dead animal. So it can be used more broadly. The origin of the word, though, was talking about a dead body of an animal. Notice the difference. When you're talking about a human, you call it a corpse. But for an animal, it's a carcass. But as I've said, it doesn't have to be talking about the dead body of an animal. It could be the remains of anything, an object. The caricature. This is a more complex word, so pay close attention. A caricature is both a noun and a verb, and it could be a picture, a description, or an imitation of a person in which you exaggerate some of their features, some of their characteristics, in order to create a funny, a comic, or a horrible, grotesque effect. Think of it as a parody or a mockery. Have you seen those people who sit down and draw people at a fun fair and they make the nose really big or the eyes really big? That's a caricature. It's a picture of someone where they're exaggerating certain characteristics. But it doesn't have to be a drawing. Imagine in a journalistic article, if they portray a politician and they say he stammered 1,000 times. That's a caricature. It's exaggerated. Maybe the person stammered a few times, but it's exaggerated for funny effect. It's a mockery, you could say. A caricature. Let's examine each of these example sentences. First one is a noun. His performance in the film was a caricature of a hard-boiled detective. Hard-boiled just means hardened and tough. But if his performance was a caricature, it means maybe the person exaggerated too much, was way too tough. And this sentence is mocking slightly the performance by saying it was a caricature, over the top. It was a parody of what it's supposed to be. It was supposed to be just a hard-boiled detective, but his performance was a caricature. Now, of course, that could be deliberate or not deliberate. It could be on purpose, and so the performer deliberately exaggerated it, maybe as part of a comedy, or maybe it wasn't on purpose and they just did a bad acting job. In either case, it was still a caricature. Let's see how caricature can be used as a verb now. The press caricatured him as clumsy and forgetful. So maybe the person did something clumsy or forgot something once, but they mocked and parodied him as someone who's consistently clumsy and forgetful. It's an exaggeration to make him out to be that clumsy, that forgetful. He only did it a few times. It was a deliberate description, which was an exaggeration for either comic, hilarious effect, or grotesque, disgusting effect. So the context in which you see the word caricature makes a big difference to how it's used. I hope that gives you a sense of the word caricature. I know it's quite a tough one, but next word, carnage. Carnage is a great and usually bloody slaughter or injury, as in a battle. So carnage normally meant lots and lots of people dying, presumably in a battle or a disaster. But I've seen this word used more and more often metaphorically. Maybe describing a board meeting, which was carnage because so many people got fired. Now, no one died, but it was still a slaughter, you could say. Or in this example sentence, higher taxes at a time when businesses are desperate to recover from the economic carnage of the pandemic is a no-go. Notice it was economic carnage, a slaughter of the economy, lots of money being lost and businesses closing. No one actually died. So the origin of the word, and it can still be used like this, is carnage when there's slaughter, people dying, carnage on a battlefield. But I'm just letting you know it can be used more broadly for any kind of slaughter. Cataclysm. A large-scale and violent event in the natural world. A natural disaster, usually a flood. Or a sudden violent political or social upheaval. So it doesn't have to be a natural disaster, even though I think that's where the word originated. Take this example. The cataclysm of the First World War upended, turned around, spun around global politics. The First World War obviously isn't a natural disaster, it was human caused, but we can still say that it was a cataclysm, a violent event, political or social, usually sudden as well. And we say words like upheaval and upended because a cataclysm always leaves a mark. It never leaves things as they were before. Notice quickly just how the word begins, kata, because you might notice something in our next word. A catastrophe is an event causing great and usually sudden damage, just like a cataclysm, or suffering, a disaster. An example sentence would be, deforestation and erosion can lead to an ecological catastrophe, a disaster. I know immediately what you're going to say. What is the difference between catastrophe? Notice how it's pronounced, by the way. It's not catastrophe, it's catastrophe, and cataclysm. What is the difference? The only thing I can say is that usually if you're calling something a cataclysm, you're really talking about a global event that hits international news, like a really big event, maybe a war or a huge natural disaster. A catastrophe can be used for smaller things. For example, that business going under was a catastrophe for the local economy. Yes, it's very damaging, a lot of suffering, but it's not like loads of people died or it's going to hit international headlines. So a cataclysm is more reserved for huge events, whereas a catastrophe is really bad and there's sudden damage and it's a disaster, maybe even people die, but it's not quite on the same scale. Nevertheless, you can almost use the words interchangeably, and if anyone describes something as a catastrophe, you know that it's something that's caused a lot of damage and suffering. Causal. This is the final word, and I picked on this one even though it seems like a very simple word, like one thing causing another. But I often see it used and see students not understanding it. Yes, the definition is acting as a cause. And a cause is a person or thing that gives rise to something else. But how would you use that word causal? Well, a causal relationship is one in which one thing caused the other. So for example, being overweight and watching TV. Is that a causal relationship? We don't know. Is it that being overweight causes you to watch more TV? Or watching TV causes you to be overweight? Or is there no causal relationship? That's what the word means. Does one thing cause the other thing? Is that thing a causal factor? Did it help to cause the events? Notice the difference, by the way. This is not casual. That's with the S and the U switched. That's totally different. That means informal, fun. This is causal. And it can be used, for example, in this sentence, we should examine whether there is a causal relationship between a firm's diversity and its financial performance. As in, does more diversity lead to better financial performance? Or does better financial performance lead to more diversity? Or is there no established relationship between them? No causal relationship. One thing doesn't cause the other. That's how we use this word causal. Anyway, I really hope these 14 additional words went straight into your vocab list. And if there's any new word you learnt today, do let me know.